Most victims never see it coming. Lindy Sue Biechler saw it coming for months. She named it. She described it. She begged the people around her to believe her. Nobody did. That is not the tragedy. The tragedy is that she was completely right. And the man she was afraid of was living 30 feet away the entire time. A man threw away a paper cup at an airport. Dropped it in the trash without a second thought and walked to his gate. He had been doing exactly that for 48 years. Moving through his life, going on vacations, raising children, retiring from his job, waking up every single morning less than 5 miles from the place where he murdered a 19-year-old girl. And nobody knew. For 48 years nobody knew. Until that cup. Until the detectives who reached into that trash can and pulled out the one thing he never thought would catch him. A cup of coffee he had already forgotten about. This is the story of Lindy Sue Biechler. And what you are about to hear is the most important part of it. She told everyone what was coming. She said it out loud. More than once. And not a single person believed her. Welcome to Midnight Crime 247. If you are new here, this channel is where cold cases get the attention they deserve. Hit that like button right now, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let us know you are here. Because Lindy Sue deserves every set of eyes on this story. Lindy Sue Little was born on January 31, 1956 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Her parents separated when she was young and she grew up with her mother. Her father later had a son named Mike, nearly a decade younger than Lindy. And despite that gap, those two were inseparable. Mike would spend the rest of his adult life refusing to let the world forget what happened to his sister. He would later describe her in 3 words. Loyal. Free spirit. Hard worker. Her husband Philip had his own version of Lindy. He met her through her stepsister whose husband worked with him. One afternoon he went over to help paint their apartment. Lindy was there. And years later, decades after everything fell apart, Philip still described that moment the exact same way. He said he was pleased and surprised that a pretty girl like Lindy found him interesting and wanted to get to know me. That is not a man retelling a memory. That is a man who still cannot believe his luck. Even after everything that came after it. They married in October 1974. Lindy was 18 years old. Philip was working at a Hertz car rental and taking classes at Millersville State College. Lindy worked part-time at a flower shop, but that was just the beginning. She wanted to own one someday. She pushed Philip toward finishing college. She wanted him to become an art teacher. She wanted children. She had a whole future already mapped out in her mind, and Philip was standing at the center of every part of it. In 1974 they moved into their first home together. Unit 14A at Spring Manor Apartments on Kloss Drive in Manor Township. A small 4-unit building. First floor. Fresh start. A young married couple with everything in front of them. And almost immediately after moving in, something changed. Lindy started feeling like she was being watched. Not a vague background unease. Not the kind of nerves that come with moving somewhere new. This was specific. It was persistent. She felt it in the hallways of the building. In the parking lot walking to her car. In the stillness of the apartment on the evenings when Philip was still at work and the outside had gone dark and quiet. She told her friends. She told her family. She said that someone in or around that building was watching her. That it had been going on for weeks. That something was wrong. And everyone said the same thing back to her. You just moved. You are stressed. You are overthinking it. They blamed the adjustment of being newly married. The pressure of building a life from scratch. The nerves of a young woman in a new space. They were wrong. Then one night it stopped being a feeling and became something she could not explain away. Lindy was home alone. Philip was on his evening shift. The apartment was completely quiet. She looked up toward the front door. Through the small glass pane set into the door, two eyes were staring back at her. Unblinking. Still. Just watching. The moment her eyes locked with his, he was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Just a smudge on the glass and the silence of an empty hallway. He had been close enough to touch her door. Close enough to study the layout of her apartment. Close enough to confirm she was alone. After that night, Lindy refused to be home alone after dark. But Philip's schedule had not changed. The evenings were still his longest shifts. Winter was coming. The days were getting shorter. And on most nights Lindy still came home to an empty apartment, locked the door behind her, sat in the silence, and waited. There was another night, this one at her brother Mike's house. Everyone was downstairs relaxed. And then from the second floor a crash. A mirror had fallen from the wall and shattered on the floor above them. In any other home on any other night that is a 5-second story. A mirror falls. You check on it. You move on. But Lindy's entire body went rigid. She grabbed Philip and told him to check every room, every closet, every corner of that house before anyone moved. Mike watched her in that moment and saw something he had not expected. This was not nerves. This was not a woman being dramatic. Her mind had reached a place where even the sound of glass breaking in an empty room above her meant someone was already inside. That is what months of living in genuine fear does to a person. It rewires the way your brain processes everything around you. Your mind stops asking what if and starts answering he is here. And still nobody connected the dots out loud. Nobody sat down and asked the one question that might have changed everything. Who exactly is watching her and why? Instead they called it stress. They called it anxiety. They called it the kind of thing young women sometimes feel when life changes too fast. They were wrong. On December 5, 1975, Lindy finished her shift at the flower shop while it was still light outside. She had a few errands to run. Nothing about the day looked or felt like a last day. She picked up Philip's paycheck from the Hertz location. Stopped at the bank. Did the grocery shopping in Millersville. $46 in cash. More bags than she could carry in one trip. She pulled into the Spring Manor parking lot at around 7:15 in the evening. Dark already. Cold. She grabbed the first load of groceries, walked to Unit 14A, set them on the kitchen table, turned around, and walked back to her car for the second trip. That walk lasted maybe 90 seconds. Long enough to leave the front door unlocked. Long enough for someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment to slip inside. That you need to understand. Sinopoli had not just lived in the same building as Lindy. He had lived at 104 Kloss Drive. The exact same 4-unit building. He was married at the time, living there as a young couple just like Lindy and Philip. Their lives had crossed. They had shared walls, shared a parking lot, shared the same small building. He had learned her schedule from the inside. He knew which nights Philip worked late. He knew when the lot was quiet. He had moved out sometime before August of 1975, just months before the murder. But he had never moved far. He stayed in the same county. He stayed close enough. Back to that Friday night. Across town, Lindy's Aunt Celeste and Uncle Merle were heading to a basketball game. Their child was playing. But they made a quick detour first. They would stop by Lindy's apartment before the game. She should not be alone on a Friday night. They pulled up at 8:46 in the evening. Merle stayed in the car. Celeste walked to Unit 14A. The front door was unlocked. She pushed it open. The first thing she saw was the lamp on the floor. Knocked over. The kind of thing that does not fall on its own. Celeste stepped inside and called out for Lindy. No answer. The apartment was quiet in a way that did not feel like quiet. It felt like something had already happened and the air was still holding it. Then she saw the signs of a struggle. Then she took one more step toward the kitchen. And she found her. Lindy was on the kitchen floor. The groceries from her first trip were still sitting on the table directly above her. Bread. Vegetables. Ordinary things bought less than an hour earlier sitting right there while she lay beneath them. Innocence and violence separated by 18 inches of kitchen table. Celeste ran. When police arrived and walked through that door, the first officer on scene was a veteran. He would later say that he had served in World War II and had never in his life seen so much blood. That statement. From a man who had walked through wartime. That is the kind of detail that tells you exactly what was waiting inside that apartment. And he crime scene itself. When police found Lindy, the knife was still embedded in her neck. The wooden handle had been wrapped in a tea towel. Wrapped deliberately. That single detail changes the read on this entire crime. Whoever did this came prepared. This was not something that escalated. This was planned. The towel around the handle means he was thinking clearly enough about fingerprints while committing the act. That is not rage out of control. That is calculation dressed up as rage. The medical examiner confirmed Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. Wounds in the throat, the upper chest, the abdomen, and the back. 2 separate knives were used. The butcher knife from her own kitchen with the tea towel wrapped around it. And a second knife, a smaller 4-inch blade, that the killer had brought with him. That knife left the apartment with him that night and was never found. Defensive wounds on Lindy's hands confirmed she had fought back. She had not surrendered. She fought with everything she had. A retired FBI consultant who later reviewed the case said the killer almost certainly delivered a crippling blow early in the attack. What came after that crippling blow was something else entirely. 19 stab wounds. 2 knives. A towel to avoid prints. No signs of forced entry on any window or door. Whoever walked into that apartment either had a key or walked through a door Lindy had left unlocked for 90 seconds. Outside, a dark-colored American-made car had been spotted near the building. Headlights on. Engine running. Waiting. By the time police went looking, the space was empty. No plate. No witness who had looked closely enough. Philip was at work when the call came. He arrived at the complex and detectives stopped him from going inside. He was 22 years old. Married barely a year. He stood in the same parking lot where Lindy had pulled in just hours earlier, groceries in her arms, walking inside for the last time. And now he stood there trying to understand what he was being told. When Lindy's father heard the news, the grief hit him so suddenly and so violently that police had to physically restrain him. A father held back by strangers in a parking lot while somewhere inside that building his daughter was still on the kitchen floor. On the day Lindy was buried, a reporter asked Police Chief Donald Sheeler where the investigation stood. He said, "We actually do not have a thing at this time." He was being honest. Because despite everything collected from that apartment, they were standing at the start of a road that would take nearly 5 decades to reach its end. Buried inside that evidence was something microscopic. Invisible to the naked eye. Pressed into the fabric of Lindy's clothing and on her pantyhose. A biological signature the killer left behind without knowing it existed. In 1975 there was no way to read it. So it waited. In the weeks that followed, police interviewed over 300 people. Chased leads. Cleared suspects one by one. Philip was cleared within days. A local man connected to other violent crimes was on investigators' radar but was killed during a prison escape in July 1976. Whatever he knew died with him. For months after Lindy's murder, a 43-year-old woman was stabbed to death 15 miles away. Same style of attack. Same level of violence. Detectives laid both files side by side, but when a man was convicted for that murder and denied any connection to Lindy, investigators looked hard and found none. Another door closed. By the end of 1976, the case had no suspects, no leads, no direction. Then the killer reminded everyone he had not gone anywhere. December 26, 1976. 1 year and 3 weeks after the murder. Lindy's family drove to Bowman's United Methodist Church in Pequea Township to visit her grave. Her headstone had been drenched in red paint. Not splashed carelessly. Soaked. And beneath the paint, deep scratches had been gouged into the stone. The kind you only make if you press hard and stay long enough to mean every single one. Every other grave in that cemetery was untouched. Just hers. The red was the color of what he had done to her. The scratches were the count of it. He had stood at her grave in the dark and recreated it. He was not done with Lindy Sue Biechler. Even in death he would not leave her alone. 9 days later, on January 5, 1977, an envelope arrived at the Manor Township Police Department. Written on the outside in capital letters. Chief Donald Sheeler opened it and found 2 handwritten pages in 2 different styles of handwriting. The first page was from someone claiming to be the killer. It taunted police. Said it ate him alive knowing they had not caught him yet. Said he was still around. Said visiting Lindy's grave had turned him on. Said the scratches on the stone represented the knife stab count and told police to count them. Then the tone cracked completely. The same letter swung to begging. Asked if God would forgive him. Said he had been under the influence of amphetamines on the night of December 5. Described himself as well-educated with a good job. Single. Living in the West End of Lancaster suburbs. 5 feet 10. And then it ended with a direct plea to the chief. Help me before I kill again. The second page was signed by a woman calling herself Janice Crum. She claimed to be the killer's friend. Wrote that he had confessed everything to her. Said he was mentally ill. Said if the letter was published he would turn himself in. Police found a real woman named Janice Crum in Lancaster County. She had no connection to the case whatsoever. The FBI brought in a profiler named James Fitzgerald, an expert in forensic stylistics. His conclusion reshaped the entire investigation. Both pages, he said, were written by the same person. The capitalization patterns, the underlining, specific spelling choices matched in ways a forger would not think to replicate. And then he said something that cracked the case open in a completely new direction. The writer was possibly a woman or someone deeply conflicted about their identity. His reasoning was that the second page was written from the perspective of a calm observer, which is how women tend to structure written communication. And in 1975 very few men would describe themselves as fat and beautiful. But police already knew Lindy's killer was male. A bloody shoe print at the scene had confirmed that. So if Fitzgerald was right, the letter was not from the killer alone. It was from someone close to him. Someone who knew what had happened. Someone present or protecting him, or both. A second person. That possibility was never resolved. It remains open today. Then came the worst institutional failure of the entire investigation. The original letter, the only physical object connecting directly to the killer's mind, was lost by the evidence lab. Not destroyed. Not stolen. Lost. No fingerprints had ever been lifted from it. No handwriting preserved for any future comparison. The one piece of evidence that could have reached forward in time and identified him decades earlier. Gone. The case had been handed an extraordinary window into the person responsible, and the system lost it. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now and type "still here." Let us see who is truly following this story, because what is coming next is where this case changes completely. After that, the years became a cycle of failure. 1982, a Florida serial killer with 37 confessed murders was circulated and ruled out. 1984, the district attorney paid $2,000 for two psychics whose descriptions matched thousands of men and led nowhere. 1989, scientists attempted DNA extraction from a dried blood sample and found it too deteriorated to use. 1992, a new detective team took over and still nothing moved. In June 2006, a volunteer group of 50 forensic experts, profilers, and former law enforcement agents from across the country gathered specifically to hear the Biechler case. For the first time in a closed room, investigators revealed what they believed the motive had been. That motive was never made public. It went into that room with those 50 people and never came back out. Whatever drove David C. Napoli to walk into that apartment on December 5, 1975, the investigators believed they had the answer. And they sealed it. To this day, the motive has never been publicly disclosed. Meanwhile, Lindy's parents were running out of time. Her father Wayne died in the summer of 2000. Her mother Eleanor followed in early 2007. For 30 years they had lived in the same county as the man who killed their daughter. Passing strangers on the street, looking at faces, sitting in church pews, never knowing which set of eyes had been the last ones Lindy ever saw. They spent 30 years looking. They died in the dark. But one person refused to accept that this was how Lindy's story ended. Mike Little had spent his entire adult life watching this case go nowhere. He was a United States Navy officer. Disciplined. Methodical. The kind of person who does not accept "we tried" as a final answer. Lindy was his older half-sister. And for 30 years the system had failed her completely. In December 2007, Mike arranged for a billboard on Route 30 near Route 283, one of the busiest stretches of highway in Lancaster County. On it, 2 photographs. 2 young women. And a question in large letters above their faces. Do you know who murdered us? The second face belonged to Christy Merck, a 25-year-old schoolteacher from Lancaster, raped and murdered in her home in December 1992. Her brother Vince had connected with Mike through shared grief. 2 brothers. 2 unsolved cases. One last attempt to make a city remember. The billboard was supposed to stay up for 30 days. The advertising agency kept it up for 10 extra days at no charge. Local news covered both cases again. No new leads came in. But Mike did not take that as defeat. He was a Navy officer. The word yet was still doing work in his life, and he was not done. Back in 1997, forensic scientists had quietly managed to extract a male DNA profile from the biological evidence found on Lindy's clothing. After 22 years, science had finally caught up enough to read what the killer had left behind. In 2000, that profile was entered into CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database. The system searched and returned nothing. Whoever had killed Lindy had never been convicted of a crime requiring a DNA sample. The profile sat there unmatched for the next 18 years. Then in June 2018, Lancaster County got an answer in a completely separate case that changed everything. Raymond Rowe, a 49-year-old DJ who performed under the name DJ Freeze, was arrested for the rape and murder of Christy Merck, the same woman whose face was on that billboard with Lindy. The tool that caught him was genetic genealogy. A method that does not require the killer to already be in a criminal database. It works by finding distant relatives who voluntarily uploaded DNA to genealogy websites and then building family trees outward until a likely match is identified. DNA had just reached into the past and pulled out a killer who thought he had been invisible for 26 years. Philip Biechler saw the news. He had remarried and was living quietly in Millersville. He had carried the weight of December 5, 1975 for over 4 decades. He read about Christy's case being solved and felt something he had not felt in a long time. If Christie could get justice after 26 years, why not Lindy after 43? He made calls. He pushed. And in 2018, Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman commissioned Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based genetic research firm, to take a fresh look at the DNA evidence from the Biechler case. Crime 247 gives you the full picture. The genealogist Parabon assigned to this case was C.C. Moore, one of the most respected forensic genetic genealogists in the country. Moore has been directly responsible for identifying suspects in hundreds of cold cases. She is not a background figure. She is the reason this case broke open. She took the killer's DNA profile and began building family trees from the outside in, using immigration records, newspaper archives, and public genealogy databases. And it was through those newspaper archives that she made the connection that stopped the investigation cold. She did not just find a DNA relative who lived in Lancaster County. She found that the suspect lived at the exact same address as the victim. 104 Kloss Drive. Spring Manor Apartments. Same building. Same years. But before that confirmation, Parabon started with DNA phenotyping to give investigators a face. Human DNA does not just identify who you are. It contains information about what you look like. Skin tone, eye color, hair color, facial structure. By studying the genetic markers in the killer's sample, scientists built a visual estimate of the man who had stood in Lindy's apartment in December 1975. On September 5, 2019, 44 years after the murder, investigators released two composite images to the public. One showed what the killer likely looked like at age 25 around the time of the murder. The second showed an age-progressed version of what he might look like today at around 65 years old. For 44 years he had been faceless. Now for the first time he had eyes. A jawline. Features. The images were distributed across every media outlet in the region. Tips came in. Every single one led to a dead end. But Parabon was not finished. In December 2020, the district attorney's office asked Parabon to go further and conduct a full genetic genealogy analysis. This is where the real detective work began. The killer was not in any genealogy database, but his distant cousins might be. His third cousins, his fourth cousins. People who had no idea they shared bloodlines with a murderer. Parabon's researchers began building family trees branch by branch, eliminating candidates methodically. The DNA told them something early. The killer's ancestry traced to a small village called Gasparina in the Calabria region of southern Italy. That narrowed the field significantly. From there, C.C. Moore cross-referenced newspaper archives with the addresses linked to the family trees she was building, and the name David Vincent Sinopoli appeared. In December 2021, after more than a year of genealogical research, Parabon gave Lancaster County detectives a name. David Sinopoli. Police pulled his records. No criminal history. Never once connected to the Biechler investigation across 46 years of inquiry. But there was one detail that made every detective in that room go completely still. In 1974 and 1975, David Sinopoli had lived at 104 Kloss Drive. He had been married at the time. He had been living in that 4-unit building at the same time as Lindy and Philip. Their lives had overlapped as young married couples in the same small building. He had moved out sometime before August 1975, just months before the murder. He had never been a suspect. Not once in 46 years. Now they had his name. They had 46 years of evidence pointing at him. But they needed fresh DNA, current and undeniable, the kind that holds up in court. And they could not just ask him for it. They needed him to give it to them without knowing he was giving it at all. In February 2022, David Sinopoli walked into Philadelphia International Airport and gave it to them. February 11, 2022. Philadelphia International Airport. Morning crowds. Thousands of people moving, checking phones, buying coffee. Except for the detectives who were not moving at all. They had been watching Sinopoli for weeks. They knew his face, his routine, his address. They had a DNA profile from 1975 waiting for something fresh to compare against. They could not approach him. Could not tip him off. So they waited. Sinopoli was at the airport with his wife and another couple heading out on a trip. He ordered a coffee. He drank it. And when he was done he dropped the cup into a trash can and walked toward his gate. The moment he was out of sight a detective walked to that trash can, reached in, and picked up a paper cup a 68-year-old man had thrown away without a second thought. That cup went into an evidence bag. That bag went to DNA Labs International. What came back in April 2022 was not a clue. It was a confirmation 46 years in the making. The testing showed the coffee cup contained a DNA mixture with one male contributor. The electronic data files were then forwarded to Cybergenetics, a Pittsburgh laboratory specializing in separating mixed DNA profiles. Their analysis returned a single number. 1 in 10 trillion. The entire population of Earth is 8 billion people. 1 in 10 trillion means the odds of that DNA belonging to anyone other than David Sinopoli were beyond any calculation a human mind can meaningfully hold. In June 2022 the blood drops on Lindy's pantyhose were also confirmed to be consistent with the same DNA profile. 2 separate biological samples. Both pointing at the same man. Both confirmed 47 years after the night he left them behind. It was him. On the morning of July 17, 2022 Lancaster County detectives drove to a home in East Hempfield Township. David Sinopoli answered the door. He was 68 years old. Retired from Yurchak Printing where he had worked for 17 years and where colleagues described him as a model employee, friends with everyone, like part of the family. He had been married for 36 years. He had 3 children and 9 grandchildren. His wife, according to his own attorney, had absolutely no idea what her husband had done. His co-workers were shocked when the news broke. His neighbors had no idea. To every single person in his life David Sinopoli was an ordinary man living out a quiet retirement. And every single morning for 46 years he had woken up less than 5 miles from the apartment on Kloss Drive. He had never left Lancaster. He stayed. Built a family. Watched his children grow up. Held grandchildren. Retired. Went on vacation. Threw away a paper cup. And said nothing to anyone. He was arrested without incident. The exact time between the murder and the arrest was later calculated. 46 years, 7 months, and 12 days. He pleaded not guilty in October 2022. He sat in Lancaster County Prison without bail for a full year. Then on October 19, 2023 David Sinopoli walked into a Lancaster County courtroom and changed his plea to guilty on 3 charges. 3rd-degree murder. Aggravated assault. Burglary. The charges were governed by the laws as they existed in 1975 before modern sentencing guidelines. The room was full. Lindy's family on one side. Sinopoli's family on the other. A large photograph of Lindy Sue Biechler, 19 years old, placed on an easel next to the defendant's table. Assistant District Attorney Christine Wilson prosecuted the case and turned to that photograph. These cases are never forgotten. Lindy Sue will never be forgotten. While the defendant was able to carry on with his life, Lindy was extinguished by him. She turned directly to Sinopoli and pointed at the photograph. Look at her. Look at the precious life you stole in 1975. Sinopoli glanced at the photograph without reaction. Philip Biechler stood and spoke. He was in his 70s now. The young man who had gone to help paint an apartment and met a girl named Lindy stood in that courtroom and tried to put 48 years into words. He said he had tried to live out Lindy's hopes for him. He finished college. Became an artist the way she had always encouraged him to be. But after the murder he built walls around himself to shield him from his own emotions. He never discussed how it felt. He never sought counseling. At times he used alcohol and drugs to hide or cloud his grief. He eventually remarried. He built a life. But he never stopped caring. December 5, 1975. Then he looked directly at Sinopoli. David Sinopoli, you took a huge part of my life from me and caused an extraordinary amount of pain and suffering for so many people. While others had to live with the terrible consequences of what you did, you got to live your life. While I forgive you because my God tells me to, you need to pay for your actions. Lindy's sister-in-law Elizabeth Clark also spoke. She looked at Sinopoli and said what the family had been waiting 48 years to say. While you, Mr. Sinopoli, continued to live life, Lindy did not. Judge David Ashworth then addressed Sinopoli directly. You chose to viciously stab Lindy Sue Biechler 19 times and then defile her to satisfy your own selfish sexual desires. The enormity of the damage you have caused is incomprehensible. The depravity of your actions cannot be overstated. And then the judge said something that cut through every legal formality in that room. Make no mistake. You are not standing here because you developed a pang of conscience. You did not come forward to give this family closure. I have seen nothing in your conduct or your words to suggest that you are truly remorseful for what you have done. Then the judge said the two words this case had been building toward for 48 years. Finally. Finally. After too long, justice has finally been served. David Sinopoli was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison, receiving the maximum possible sentence for each separate charge as those penalties existed in 1975. He was also ordered to pay over $25,000 in court costs to cover the DNA laboratory expenses that caught him. Given his age of 69 at sentencing, Judge Ashworth confirmed what everyone in that room already knew. This was effectively a life sentence. He will almost certainly die behind bars. When given his chance to speak, David Sinopoli said 9 words. I would like to apologize to everyone, including my wife. No explanation. No motive. No answer to the question Philip asked directly in that courtroom. The why has never been answered. The motive that detectives identified decades ago and sealed inside a case file stayed sealed. Some things the system keeps even after it delivers justice. Lancaster County District Attorney Heather Adams had the last word on behalf of the institution. Because of the dedication of many law enforcement officers from multiple agencies over the years, justice was finally obtained for Lindy Sue Biechler. She was 19 years old. Newly married. Full of plans for a flower shop, a family, a future she never got to live. For months before the night everything ended, she told everyone around her that something was wrong. That someone was watching her. That she was afraid. She said it clearly. She said it more than once. To her husband, to her friends, to her family. And everyone told her she was imagining it. She was not. The man who watched her had lived 30 feet away. He had learned her schedule from inside the building. He knew which nights Philip worked late. He knew when the parking lot went quiet. He moved out in the months before the murder, but he never moved far. He stayed in the same county for 46 years, raised a family, retired from a job where everyone liked him, held grandchildren at Christmas, went on vacation, and threw away a paper cup. And said nothing to anyone. It took a science that did not exist when she died. It took a genetic map traced to a village in southern Italy. It took a genealogist named C.C. Moore building family trees from immigration records and newspaper archives until one address appeared twice. It took 2 detectives reaching into an airport trash can on an ordinary Tuesday morning and pulling out the one thing a killer never thought about. It took all of that to prove what Lindy already knew. She told everyone she was being watched. She was right. And 48 years later, the world finally believed her. This is Midnight Crime 247, and this story is not just about Lindy. It is about every time someone said I feel like something is wrong and the people around them decided they knew better. Believe people when they tell you they are afraid. It costs nothing. And it could cost everything not to. If this story stayed with you, hit that like button, subscribe to Midnight Crime 247, and share this right now so Lindy's name reaches further than it ever has. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of this case broke you, because this channel is built on the names that deserve to be remembered. We will see you on the next one.